Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about a manga series that I really enjoyed, which is Prison School. Now, why am I talking about Prison School in the first place? Well, this to shed some light about some unfair criticism that I think the series received. One of the things is that I think a lot of people judge it by its cover. As soon as they know it's an ecchi manga, they're like, oh, it's probably trash, I'm not gonna read it, yada yada. Also, another thing that I've seen discussed about is the fact that a lot of the fans hate the ending of the manga, but I'm one of those people that think it's actually pretty good, and I think a lot of the reasons that people give as to why it's not a good ending doesn't really make a lot of sense, so I'll be talking about that in the second portion of this video. Do not worry though, I'll try to keep the video spoiler free for the first part, and there will be a warning of spoilers somewhere mid through the video. So don't worry, if I convince you to read this or watch the anime, well then great, you can stop the video there and then watch the rest once you've finished. So the main reason as to why I think people think this is not gonna be a good manga series or a good anime is the fact that it's an ecchi manga. For those of you who don't know what ecchi is, well, it's basically that style of manga where you get a lot of panty shots, you see a lot of cleavage, the occasional nipple slip and stuff like that. Basically, there's like a whole lot of sexualization of its female characters. Although in Prison School, you also get some sexy moments from the boys themselves. So I can understand why this will throw a lot of people off. Actually, a lot of people will feel very uncomfortable reading something like this, and the purpose of this video is not really force these people to read the series or watch the anime, but rather it is to, say that even if it's an ecchi manga, it still has a lot of stuff going for it. Now the main thing you'll notice if you read Prison School is that it is mainly a comedy manga. We all have that one friend that, kind of repeats a joke someone else said, but whenever they say it, it's funnier. And this is entirely the case in Prison School. It's all about the delivery of the jokes. One thing I actually love is the fact that characters have so many facial expressions to them, and a lot of them are pretty funny. But when you watch anime, or read manga, there's always like just a couple of faces the characters make, like angry, sad, happy, whatever. But in Prison School you get like the entire spectrum, and it just helps make things way more absurd, way funnier. The brand of comedy in Prison School is absurd comedy. Over the top, there's a lot of like corny dialogue, and it just kind of pushes forward to see how unrealistic the situations can get. It's not a sci-fi show by any means, but at the same time, while these things could actually happen in real life, they're pretty unrealistic and pretty absurd. And one thing I want to mention is that while a lot of times the ecchi elements are just thrown in for fan service and they don't really match the story or anything else, I think in Prison School the ecchi elements are actually very well placed. They're sort of intertwined with the comedy, and they also push things forward to see how ridiculous things can get. And even as someone who doesn't mind the ecchi elements but actually like them, sometimes it actually becomes too much. And I think that's an important thing to point out, because the show doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's kind of the whole thing about it. Also, the humor here is pretty lighthearted. There's not like dark humor, stuff like that. I mean, a lot of the times it's pretty sexual and everything, but there's also humor about pretty much anything else on the series. And just to give it props, this is probably the only manga that while reading it I found myself crying of laughter. Like, usually it's just a little grin, or when I'm watching something, a little chuckle, but when I was reading through Prison School, I was actually crying of laughter in some parts. It is so unbelievably funny. I think that thing alone is what makes it worth reading. Now, while it is mainly a comedy manga, at the same time there are moments where this transcends comedy. One of the things I wanted to point out is that reading through this, a lot of the times I found myself thinking of the Stanford Prison Experiment. For those of you who don't know what it is, you should look it up. It's pretty interesting. There was even a movie made about it. And I think the manga series also features kind of a similar moral to the story. There's also quite a bit of like historical reference throughout the manga about China's history, and they're kind of used for comedic purpose. And I don't know, you kind of get to learn and at the same time laugh about it quite a bit. Another thing is that there's some surprisingly well-built characters here, Some characters that at the beginning you don't really know their intentions or why they are the way they are, but as you start reading through this series, you kind of start realizing about the backstory, and some of the characters you didn't really care about at the beginning suddenly start becoming your favorites. And the relationships between the characters are quite interesting, There's some relationships of rivalry, romance, you know, the bros, and there's quite a bit of moments here where I don't know, the series just hit you right in the feels. Another thing that I really, really like about this series is the plotting. You know, if you have enjoyed animes like Detective Conan or any like crime or police related anime, these series have surprisingly some pretty, heavy moments of that. There's some elaborate planning going on, and in Detective Conan, when the detective gets put to sleep and Conan kind of explains how he found out who the killer was, there's similar moments here with like a lot of suspense and a lot of, elaborate planning built to it, and it's just so gratifying to see. And one final thing that I think just make this like worthwhile reading is just how well drawn it is. There's a lot of eye candy here, and no, I'm not referring to the ecchi moments, or probably I am, but either way, I feel like there's like such good panels here, and by the numbers, like every 2 pages you will find something that is like wallpaper worthy and something like just incredibly well drawn. And a lot of the times there are moments that aren't even serious that actually use this to their advantage, like super detailed backgrounds, and just they help push that kind of absurd comedy forward. And I don't know, the fact that it is like so gratifying to look at, even if it's serious, even if it's not, is just something that is amazing. Now, with all this said, if the ecchi elements still make this uncomfortable for you to read, or you still think it's terrible, I think there has to be some justice brought to the author here, Akira Hiramoto. Not only because his art is amazing, but he's also able to create different stories. For those of you who don't know, he also has a manga called Me and the Devil Blues, which basically follows the life of the bluesman Robert Johnson. This is more of like a fictional biography, there are some like supernatural elements and some stuff that can't be confirmed that happened that way, so he changes up the story a lot from what we actually know about Robert Johnson, but that's what makes it actually fun to read through. So, an author that is able to make such a different story, and one that is actually pretty intriguing and so good, complete opposite styles from each other, should tell you that this dude actually has talent. Now, spoiler warning, now I'm gonna be talking about, of course, the pretty much universally hated ending of Prison School and why I actually like it. Now, I don't know, I don't think I have to explain the ending that much. People who read it know what it's about. Basically, Kiyoshi confesses his love to Chiyo, but Hana just like bursts in and ruins everything, and Chiyo ends up being traumatized by what she experienced, and she ends up hating men, even though she was like so angelic and so tolerable of all the things Kiyoshi did. She does like a complete 180, and now she actually hates men and is just like complete opposite of how she was. And yes, I agree with how people describe this ending as unfortunate. It is pretty unfortunate, We saw Kiyoshi trying to learn from his mistakes, trying to be a better guy, not succumb to his perviness, but in the end, it kinda is all for naught as his confession fails anyway. But at the same time, like, have you been reading through the manga? Like, this series is known for throwing like completely insane curveballs with some completely absurd situations, so even though like it is unfortunate, it was kind of to be expected, right? So I think the ending actually fits the kind of tone of the series of always being like not that serious or just throwing completely absurd situations at you. And some other people say that the ending was kind of drastic and there were a lot of things to be talked about that were not. How Mari went to study abroad and we didn't know much about that, or what's the relationships between the boys and some of the girls, like that didn't really develop. But actually going through the list of things that people say weren't like finished and actually looking at them, they were actually well resolved. There was actually a good finish to this. Like, didn't the boys only want like a normal high school life? Like, we get to see a little bit of their relationships in the start, but this manga was never, about romance or the relationships that much. I mean, sure, it was added and it gave it like new levels of enjoyment, but at the same time, the main thing was a comedy. And, despite everything, the boys kind of get what they wanted, a normal high school life. You can see them at the end just enjoying themselves and, out of prison and just living life. There's also like Meiko and Kate who kind of vicariously lived through Mari, and now that she's gone, They kind of have to start living for themselves. You know, Meiko won't be like her faithful companion anymore, and Kate doesn't have her rival. And they sort of bond through this at the end because Meiko and Kate, well, certainly didn't like each other, but they kind of seem to be on good terms near the end when they realize, well, Mari's not gonna be here anymore, and we just gotta live on through. As Mari goes to study abroad, yeah, it also makes sense. Like when you see the chairman in prison near the end, he's worried about one of his daughters. And all the time I think like, is he probably talking about Chiyo, right? But he was actually talking about Mari. He sees her as this kind of a spoiled child who always got what she wanted, and she was very comfortable in the position she was in school. So this is actually like a great chance for Mari to grow up and, you know, get to do things for herself and get to experience this alone. And even Mari gets to grow up a little bit from all of this experience, you know. She started off as this kind of woman that kind of hates all men, but she has some sort of a change of heart near the end, and well, while she still isn't that, you know, sympathetic towards men, at the same time, it was fun. The time she had in the academy with the boys was great. And another character, and well, the main character here that gets to grow up is Kiyoshi. You know, even though his confession didn't go as planned or the way he wanted to, at the same time he's able to grow up. He says this was not gonna work out, our relationship was based on lies. It's true he was not that bad of a guy and he tried to rectify himself, but he recognizes that he didn't grow up at all. His relationship was based on lies. He just is able to realize that and continue. So I think that's the way the manga sort of ends, you know, just all the characters got to grow up, got to learn from their past experiences. So there were relationships and everything, which was never like the main point of the manga in my opinion, but actually it's a good way to end it. It's a good note. And also, like, when you think about it, when you go through the series and you think, well, what was the main goal here? What's what united the boys' hearts in the first place? What's what united their soul? It was the wet t-shirt contest. And as the final page of the manga arrived and kind of get to see the boys who are back in prison and everything, but they made their goal. They're going to the wet t-shirt contest, and that's really like what their entire friendship was based about. And you know, the way it ends, obviously it's kind of a joke, but it fits the comedy, it fits the tone of the manga, and I think even though it wasn't fortunate, even though we kind of were expecting for the relationships to work and everything, I think it's a good ending. Also have to remember that Hana actually liked Kiyoshi, and we started seeing this near the end. And well, if it didn't work out with Chiyo, who says it couldn't work out with Hana, right? While I really like the ending and I really like the series through and through, I also think some of the criticism it gets, it's pretty fair, you know? The cavalry contest part definitely felt like very stretched out, and it had its fair share of funny moments, but at the same time they weren't as funny as some others on the series. So yeah, I don't think this is like the perfect manga or anything, but it's certainly very, very good, and I think while it gets some unfair criticism, some of it is fair. So that's about it. I really enjoy this series. I would really recommend them for people who just want to have a good laugh, just want to have a good time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this different style of video. I'll try to make more like this in the future. And just have a great weekend or have a great week whenever you're watching this. And I love you. See you next time.